The following is a conversation I have with my good friend Jonah Gray. He and I go all the way back to college. In fact, he was one of the first members that came to my philosophy club, Let's Consider. And he and I just became really good friends. He's a psychology major and I'm a philosophy major. So we both had really interesting conversations. Well, at least they were interesting to us. We came at the same subjects from different angles, and a friendship just kind of ensued out of our conversations. That being said, this is a conversation about free will. Now, Jonah and I both take the position that is less popular, which is that there is no free will. And this is a conversation where we lie out why we believe that, why we think that there's no free will. We go through why it is, and we talk about the implications of it. What do we do once we know we don't have free will? And how do we come to grasp that reality? And we talk a little bit about the moral implications of free will and how to construct society around free will. He and I also had a couple of beers while we were doing this conversation, so it was a bit passionate at times, and especially me, I decided to cut him off a few times, so please excuse me on that side. But we really enjoyed the conversation, or at least I did. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you get something out of it. And now I bring you Jonah Gray. Hello, Jonah. How are you?
Good, man. How are you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. I'm glad we're finally having these conversations, or recording these conversations, rather.
Right. First one.
Yeah. Weird.
Yeah, it is weird. It's always awkward, like talking, like you see other people do it on podcasts and you see other people doing their thing. Like it's no piece of cake, or it is a piece of cake. And here I am like, God, what am I doing? Do I look okay? Everything okay? Anyway.
A little awkward about hearing your voice on through the mic and everything.
Hate it.
Yeah.
That's actually been the most humbling experience for me, is listening to myself talk. I think like we all think we're way better than we are until we put it on video and look at it ourselves.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've been recording my podcast for a while, and I mean, I'm still not used to my voice. So it's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird for a long time.
It is. All right. So what are we talking about today?
We are talking about free will versus determinism.
Ooh, free will versus determinism. Well, isn't it that's interesting. Free will. Well, what's your position on free will?
I believe fundamentally, as a reality, we don't have free will. But we do have like this experience of choice that we perceive as choice. But they're essentially tied to everything we know and all of our experiences, and also external factors. So to say that it is free, to me, is a little misinformative, misrepresents what is actually going on. So I often, like when I'm explaining what I think about free will and how it's framed for me, I usually use the analogy of like studying for an exam or taking an exam. So when you're taking the exam and you are like you can only rely on what you've learned. You can only rely on what you studied and what you can then remember and recall while you're taking the exam. So I feel that life is much like that. Life is much like I can only respond to this situation in ways that I know how, and usually ways that I tend to respond to the same type of situation. So if it was more like free will, it'd be like kind of this open book exam, open internet exam, where everything is at your disposal. You're not tethered to anything. You're not limited by anything. You can openly choose and respond any type of way to the same type of thing. That's usually, it's not the case. But we do have this like experience. So when you feel like you can then arrive at this same type of experience and respond in a different way,
right?
it is usually informed by, like a pain or new information. But had that stimulus, new information never, you know, entered your mind, you would still likely be responding in a similar type of way.
Yeah, that's really
If that makes
interesting.
sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. So personally, I'm in agreement with you. I don't think that there is free will in the sense that, but hopefully people don't click off the conversation because we both disagree. We both don't think free will
Yeah.
exists. But maybe it'd be important to talk about what people mean by when they say, I have free will. Because this is why it's even an issue in philosophy. Why,
Yeah.
I mean, even the fact that, we feel like we make choices. You can ask somebody to pick up a pencil or a pen, and it feels like I decide to pick up the pen or I don't, right? So, and when that decision that's being made, people call that, or philosophy call that, libertarian free will, which basically means that we are independent of everything to make a choice. So the choice to choose our future, go to college or not go to college, start a business or not go to business, or even as simple as like, which beer do you want to drink today? Or, things like that. What do you want for dinner? Or, should I hang out with her or should I not? Should I go on my date tonight or should I not? That's, I think the feeling people feel is what's really at stake here and why this discussion is important. Because when people hear, well, there's no free will, most people think that it is kind of a ridiculous thing to say. I mean, obviously I have free will. Like, it's so clear. Our intuitions are so clear about it. So I'm curious, what do you think that is? What do you think, what is it to feel that one has free will?
I mean, initially, I'd say it's this knee-jerk reaction to what you fundamentally believe about reality. I don't. This isn't to say that you know the idea of free will can't be useful in your daily life if you find it practical to view your life in a way where you do have free will, view reality where you do have free will. It's like, I'm not going to take that away from you. If but I do see value in acknowledging its non-existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
but what is it that people say? So like when somebody's like I have a friend, well, he's more of a family member, but if I would say, oh, well, the evidence for free will is very gone. Like it's very lacking. In fact, it seems as though everything is contingent on everything else for its existence. Our neurons are contingent on itself, basically on biology, to create thinking. So thoughts are contingent on neural activity. Neural activity is contingent on our body, our nervous system, which is contingent. You can go all the way back ad infinitum. Everything has a cause, essentially. And the place where free will emerges, there really is no place for it to emerge. Yet we all feel like we are this center of decision making. So the way I think about it is like, it's kind of like seeing, the mirage on the street where you're driving off in the distance and you see it looks like water. Off in the distance, it's a mirage of water on the road. Now, it's not saying that that's not there. But what it is essentially light particles reflecting the sunlight or particles in the air reflecting the sunlight in a way that makes it look like water, when really it's not. It's not actually water. And that's kind of how I view free will. It seems like water. It seems like there's a chooser and a choice maker. Yet upon reflection scientifically and empirically, there's just no room for it at all. And maybe we don't have to talk it now, but as you know, I do a lot of meditation stuff, and this is also a big part of meditation, is that there isn't really even an illusion of free will. It's just our experience we have is interpreted as free will, when really it's just there is no freedom in it at all. For instance, like I don't know the next words that are about to come out of my mouth right now. It's not like I just chose to say these words. It's just coming out and I have no idea where they're coming from. But most of us feel that we are talking, we are thinking. There's an agent that creates these things. And I think that illusion is what's getting at, that is what we're trying to get at. That feeling of a choice maker, a doer.
Mm-hmm.
But when we say there is no free will, we're really saying, well, the mirage of water really isn't water. It's an illusion. It's not that it's not there. It's not that you don't feel that and that you're wrong. It's just that it's not really water. It's not really a will. It's not really. Anyway, this goes on deeper, and I won't go on. But what do you think about that analogy?
The mirage analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I was also going to chime in with it's kind of like just these experiences that we don't really have enough words for also, but we tack on like love. That the whole experience I had with this one girl that was love. It's like, well, I mean, it is what it was, you know. There's no replication of that experience, and then I will feel the exact same things. So all that to say, it's these two words that we put together. We say free will to explain something that we feel we perceive and experience, that we don't really have any other words for. So what I was going to say next is, one of my favorite things when I'm talking to somebody about free will, and the first thing that comes out of their mouth when I'm like, I don't think you have free will. The first thing that comes out of their mouth is almost always, oh, well, I could get up and go, run around the block. I can choose to go and do that. And it's like, I mean, but you'd be doing that just because I said that.
Right.
Just because I said that you don't have free will. So it's like, there's that cause there.
Right.
There's the cause and the effect that you go and run around the block. And so you would just be kind of reinforcing the idea that you don't have free will. And
that's kind of the point where that we make, is that we don't even know where that decision. We don't know where our decisions come from. So like, the instant reaction I get from people is the same. They're like, well, I can choose to talk about this, and I can choose to talk about that. I can choose to, and of course this has implications for our law enforcement agencies and how we treat criminals and even morality. But people have this intuition. But what the point is that we don't know how we have the intuition. We don't know how we make decisions. They kind of pop out in our mind. They just like pop up. Yet there's like this further thought that says, "Oh, I created that." There's an agent that did that. Like when I was like, "Oh, I can run around the block." Well, how do you? Where did that thought itself come from? Where?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you
go. Well, I was just gonna say that they're just emergent. They're emerging out of what is implied, an implicit order of things, which is an idea from, I believe it's from David Bohm. He talks about the explicit order versus the implicit order, and explicating what is implicated. If that makes sense. So what is implied in these different situations, or you're faced with these tasks, decisions, and whatever else. It largely depends on, like, for one thing, your level of consciousness. As you pass through that thing, what was then implied now has the opportunity to be explicated and actualized through you.
I'm not sure I'm following that. So like, what he's saying that what is implied, what does that mean? What is implied?
What is in the implicate order? So
like,
for example, go ahead.
Are you saying like implicate order, like things, causes that past causes we don't see?
No, not necessarily. It's I mean, I have a loose understanding of implicate order versus explicate order. But from what I understand, it's like your consciousness is like a net,
Hmm.
and so it's passing through all of these things that are possibilities.
Hmm.
And so as you pass through those things, sometimes you catch something, and so your that net, then once it catches that thing, that choice, that idea, those thoughts, um, you now have the opportunity to actualize it, to explicate it, to bring it into um, existence. Does that make sense?
So is that like, okay, interesting.
So
But then it
what
doesn't
one
that
thing
leave room for free will? Like if you're saying like your mind or consciousness is a net that catches certain, I guess I'm not sure what that term means. Would you say it was intuitive? What was it again?
implicate?
Implicate. So, but it catches these things and then can actualize it. But are you saying it can actualize it or not actualize it?
Um, it depends. It depends on because it might be caught unconsciously. It might not. It might just be like a seed is planted there,
Hmm.
and you're not really acknowledging it. I mean, there's all kinds of. I'd really have to delve into what how I frame it,
Hmm.
and it's this triangulation of consciousness. So this is
Triangulation of consciousness.
kind
That's
of
so interesting. Okay, go on.
so this is okay. So but bear with me.
Yeah.
This doesn't have as much to do with free will, but before I go into that, what it does have to do with is so I've been developing my own personal laws for a book that I want to write, um, helping other people design their own personal laws. So one of the laws that I practiced was remember your tether. And so when I outline what exactly that means to me is kind of what I said earlier with studying for that exam. You can only answer those questions with like what you prepared, how you prepared to answer those questions.
Okay.
So the only thing I can do, if I accept that I don't have free will, if I decide that I don't have to approach every decision and weigh the options and like put all this pressure on myself and like so I can remember this tether and then choose to inform well choose then start informing myself using different books or and listening to different teachings or podcasters, philosophers, all just intaking, essentially studying for the exam. And so then I have expanded the lens and expanded how I can respond to the question posed.
But
Does that make sense?
yeah, but to me that's kind of contradictory in the sense that if you the point for me personally is that you don't even know why you do that. So like you may do that, like you may expand your scope of what you learn, and that's what a lot of people
Yeah.
do. But to do that initially isn't known. So
Yeah.
so there's no like there's no choice in the matter. You know what I mean? So like in terms of free
Yeah.
will, so it's like yeah, I'm not sure how that relates in the sense. I guess to free will. If you, I mean it. Okay.
Well, so what I'm getting at with the tether is that if I accept that there's not free will, that I don't have free will, that my everything that I do, everything that I decide, all the choices I make are kind of unconscious weighing of outcomes, weighing of opportunity, benefit, costs, or pleasure, pain. I mean, depending on what the decision is, um, then all I then have to do is be better informed, change how I look at those things. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Yeah.
implement those. And so it's not really. but I had to be exposed to that idea, and I
Right.
also had to accept the idea that I don't have free will.
Right. So
Does
this,
that make
yeah, yeah,
sense?
yeah.
So there's precursors to it, and
Right.
so I'm not arguing for the um, like idea that free will exists. I am turning it into something practical,
Right.
because that's really what it boils down to is what does that then lead to?
Right. That's a really important subject. You're right. Like, what do we do when, like, so what are the implications of knowing that there is no free will? Right. It's
Yeah,
really
why?
important because a lot of people fear this. Like, famously, Daniel Dennett, him and Sam Harris have a really popular debate going on about free will. And Daniel Dennett is a compatibilist, and he says that free will does exist, but not so much in the metaphysical sense, but just in kind of a social sense. I listened to him today. He was saying that free will exists biologically, like this is an emergent property of biology, and of course there's no room for it still. So his kind of contention with the free will argument is, well, you really shouldn't go around telling people they don't have free will, because pragmatically, what does this mean? Like, if you tell people they don't have free will, then criminals are no longer responsible. People, the life choices you make don't really matter. There's really no reason to do anything at all. And even famously, Einstein, who was a strong determinist, Newtonian determinist, he was asked, well, what do we do with criminals? And he's like, well, we should still put them in jail. They're not responsible, but we should still put them in jail. So that to me is a good subject to start talking about. I'm not sure though that we have established really why we think there is no free will. So before moving on to that, I'm curious if you think that we've established that adequately. Like, why is it that we don't have free will? So like I think there's a couple ways to approach it. Personally, there's the philosophical side, the psychological side, like neuroscience, like empiricism, and then of course the experiential side, like the first person experience of what we mean by when we say free will. So the way I see it is that philosophically, free will is just a logical contradiction, period. If there was a free will, that would mean that the agent that expresses its will, isn't contingent on anything else, meaning that it doesn't rely on anything else to be free. And a good way to kind of show how this is not a good argument is that you can ask somebody, like, for example, you can ask, let's just close our eyes and pick your favorite ice cream. What is your favorite ice cream? Or even better, let's say your favorite dessert. You can mull over like a few, like, oh, like chocolate cake, I like ice cream. And then, ice cream. Ice cream is my favorite dessert. We have no idea how we came to that decision. That nowhere in the experience of that is there, chocolate cake or ice cream rather than chocolate cake. Because if it wasn't determined by everything else, by our experience, then that decision itself must have been totally free. Now, where in reality is there complete freedom, like complete non-contingency? Now, a lot of theists will argue that that's God. God is the non-contingent causer of all the universe. But free will is also that. Free will is also this, I am something that can make a decision regardless of anything else, regardless of... And I think that that's how most people feel to live. But it's just simply logically contradictory, because if you were this thing that can freely choose, that means you are also this thing that isn't contingent on anything else for existence, which is obviously false. We need air, we need our neurons to think, we need everything, and none of that is something we created. So to say that we are somehow an observer or a ghost in the machine that makes decisions is totally illusionary. So that's kind of the philosophical sense, which of course goes way deeper. And then even with the experiential sense, with deciding your favorite dessert, for example, or your favorite movie or whatever, we may mull over two competing ideas. Like, I think I like chocolate cake or I like baklava. I'm going to go with baklava. I love baklava is my favorite dish. There's nothing freer than that. There's no decision that seems freer than that. But if we pay attention to that experience, we don't know where that decision ultimately comes from. It seems to just pop up into our head. It just seems to baklava, boom, that's the answer. There's no like decision to think that. There's no actually decider of that experience. It's just merely you went with that. So I think that there's those two ways are very very important because philosophically it's a logical contradiction, free will, and experientially there's no room for a conscious chooser. And then empirically, there's plenty of studies, which I have in this book, of course, Sam Harris's Free Will. He has a whole bunch of examples in here, which I'm not going to quote, but maybe we should for future podcasts, like actually have, like, oh, you want the study? Here's a link in the description kind of thing. Yeah. But he talks about a study that was done in, I think by Muller in the 60s, where they gave their subjects two choices, like a green button and a red button. And then they had a timer right in front of them. And they told them, okay, choose either green or red. And then when you see that, when you've made a decision, look at the time and try to see as close as you can when you made that decision. And so they did this experiment multiple times. And this has been repeated as well, this experiment. And they found that they could actually predict what button these people were going to make 1 second to 5 to 7 seconds before they actually thought they were making that decision. So they would say, okay, I'm going to go with green. But the experimenter, the one in the green room, was watching all this and could tell immediately I didn't put the part that they were hooked up to an fMRI. So they saw blood flow and they saw where the parts of the brain where decision making was made. And they could actually tell when that decision was made before it happens. And what this suggests is that our feeling of free will, empirically, is merely another thought. It's another thought that says, I decided, after the fact. So we decide, like something happens, green button. And then there was another thought that said, oh, I decided here. But we can tell, because we can tell before the decision was made, the feeling of the thinker deciding means that thinker is just illusion. It's just a thought. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Philosophically, empirically, and experientially, free will has no room to exist.
Yeah, well, in the subject of that experiment, why does a precluding thought and then one where they then logically think like, hey, I made this decision at this point. Why does a thought precluding that showing that a decision has been made? Why does that to me that still shows that there's the possibility of free will because there's the decision being made.
Well, that's the thing, is that what that experiment shows is that the decision actually isn't made when they think it is. So if it's kind of like in the same way, we don't decide to beat our hearts or digest our food. It just kind of happens. And because that is that way, we say, oh, we don't say I'm beating my heart or I'm digesting my food. We just say my heart's beating and my food's digesting. Right? We feel this kind of separation. But but the same thing happens with decisions, that they just happen. But what we do instead is we say, oh, I'm doing that. Kind of like saying like I'm beating my heart, but we don't intuitively feel that. But we do intuitively feel like we're making decisions. So the moment we think we've made the decision isn't when the decision has been made, because it starts with basically the ad infinitum past of causes that led up to that moment. So I think what people mean by free will is if I can go in the past. I could have done something different. If I can go back 5 seconds, I could have chosen the red one instead of the green one. But the argument is, and what scientism and what empiricism says, is no, you couldn't have. Because you don't exist as an agent that decides. There's no room for it. So the experiment that shows, especially when the experimenter can predict, saying, okay, well, he's going to choose the green one, and then boom, green one. That is indicative of a lack of will, meaning that whatever it is that we think decision is a continuum, not a separate, isolated, free event. Does that make sense, or is that, maybe I said that weirdly?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But what the experiment also, to me, because I come from a little bit different background, is there's a potential to disconnect from what is actually informing you. So you have that logical area of the brain that also has the language areas of the brain, but then you also have this experiential kind of bigger picture part of the brain, and they are not actually that easily communicated to each other.
Right.
In sync necessarily. I don't know what the experimenter's name is, or
next time we'll have this put together. I think it would be better.
Yeah,
we'll have some actual.
I didn't even think of it until it doesn't really have anything to do with free will, but it does show. Well, so in this experiment, these participants are presented with two decks of cards. One deck is stacked to win. One deck is stacked to lose. And I don't remember what exactly that means, what it means to win and lose. And but it's rigged. And these participants have stress receptors on them, kind of. So, for example, perspiration. So, responding to stress. And as they are playing this game, they're supposed to do like 50 draws of the cards, and they're informed. Hey, so you lost this one, you won this one, and within, I want to say, like 30 to 40 draws, participants usually figure out this is the losing deck, this is the winning deck, this is rigged. But within like 7 draws or so, your body has a stress response to the losing deck every time you reach for the losing deck. And so I'm just wondering, does it necessarily imply no free will, or does it imply a disconnect with a deeper knowing, really? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like we talked about in one of our conversations, ineffability versus effability, like putting things into words.
F the effable. F the ineffable,
man.
Yeah, F the ineffable.
Yeah, exactly. F the ineffable.
That should be the name of our channel, F the ineffable.
Yeah.
But with an F.
But there's this disconnect, like language is, from what I understand, language is typically in the left hemisphere of the brain, and so, but you're right. The right hemisphere is interpreting reality, also, and so when we have these ineffable experiences, when we have those experiences where, like, I don't have any words for this, it's partially because you don't have, like, language doesn't belong to that part of the brain.
Are you saying?
And so,
go on.
And so I'm wondering if, not that I'm trying to make an argument that we have free will, but I'm wondering if that's what necessarily that experiment implies. Does that make sense?
You're saying, yes, I know what you're saying. If it implies that, what if free will is this thing that is true, is real, and the experiment that I just said is just an example of how we can't put into words accurately that experience, But just because we can't put it into words that that's the experience doesn't mean that that's actually not true, right? Like it doesn't mean that because I can't decide exactly when I actually do make the decision, contrary to when I think I make the decision, that doesn't imply that there's no free will. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm implying. It I'd love to see this experiment
Yeah.
and understand it more because I would just those kinds of things just intrigue me.
Yeah.
You know, the
Well,
how that
well, it's important. So to respond to that is that the reason that I think that I agree that there's always a distinction between the map and the territory, right? Like we've talked about before. So there's always a disconnect between what we can say and what there actually is. In fact, that's the distinction between epistemology and ontology. What there actually is, and then what we can know. And what we can know is never really actually what there actually is, because ontology is always separate from epistemology. That's just Kant. Thank you to Kant for that distinction. But the reason I would reject that possibility, or the reason that I would say that it's unlikely that it exists even though we just aren't explaining it well, is because our intuitions and our experiences reliably are unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
The classic example with, I think it was Hume, or was it Aristotle? Doesn't matter. Is putting a pencil in a glass and it looks broken. That's just a classic intuition. Or here's a better one. If I were to tell you, actually, let's do this. This would be fun. If maybe I've done this to you already, but if you could take a piece of paper and fold it, the limit you can fold it's like 6. You can't go to 7. But let's say technically you can fold it 100 times. You could fold, this little piece of paper. I could take this and fold it 100 times. That's 3, 4, 5. I can do it 100 times. How big do you think it'll be? Like how long do you think it'll be?
Well, double every time.
Right.
Would be pretty. Yeah.
So how big? Like make a guess. Like an object in the universe. Like an object that you can maybe attribute it to. How long do you think it would be if you could just keep folding it 100 times?
I think it'd be like cosmic level.
It is. You're right. Cosmic level. Yeah. It is right. So it would be like it would span the galaxy. I think it's like 100 light years or something like that. It's insane how long it would actually be. Most people, though, intuitively, we feel like it would be like a brick because you think of 100 layers, and so you think it's just a brick size. But really, in reality, it's like that. So our intuitions reliably fail. We know that we are very fallible thinkers. We believe in a lot of things. And it's impossible for everyone to be right about their beliefs. There's thousands of religions. There's thousands of pseudosciences. There's thousands of different things that people believe, and a lot of them are just false, and we know that. So my I was about to say my intuition, but my thought about this is that the experiment points more in the direction that there is no free will than there is a free will, and we're just missing the point, or we're just not saying it correctly. It seems like that experiment exposes the fact that what we think is going on really isn't. In the same way that we see a mirage on the road, we think it's water, but when you actually go up to see it, you realize it's not water. It's just an illusion. And I think it seems that experiment, which really I could actually, if you want, I'll put it in the description, the actual experiment, because I think it was like Mueller or something like that in the 70s. But, and they repeated it many times, like in 2012 and so. But that experiment shows that if free will were to be true, and the decision maker that we feel is there, it would be indistinguishable from the time that we say it is to that actually being there. Like when we see it happening, we decide for the red button instead of the green button. It would be at the same time that a scientist could say, oh yeah, that's when they decided. But the fact that there's a delay, a long delay, indicates it's illusion. It's illusionary substance or nature. That's just my opinion. I mean, I don't see that there's room for it to be there, and that we just can't describe it well. I think that, I just don't see like how that fits.
Yeah, really, all I was getting at was is that what that experiment is implying? Um,
Well,
so
yeah.
I just wanted to hear more about it because I wasn't sure how those two thoughts are reconciled in that experiment specifically.
Right.
Like
Well, yeah. I mean, it's
how that
really
observation is reconciled.
right. Well, I mean, of course, the interpretation of every experiment is an interpretation. So it's always like you can decide that that's the interpretation, or it could. I mean, really, all the experiment shows is that when we think we're making a decision, it actually happens beforehand. That's all that means. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean it. You're right. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's no free will, but to me, that's
Yeah.
evidence that there is none.
Yeah.
There's other evidences too. Like we lose our sense of self all the time. In fact, I think that's a large reason we, with the so-called flow states and going to movies and reading books and stuff. And of course, from where I come from with meditation, looking at the self directly and basically losing that sense of self is very important to the meditation experience. And so the fact that it can be done as well, even with psychedelics, with LSD, like they call it the ego death. The feeling of a sense of a separate I completely disappears, which that separate I is the thing that free will is contingent on. The fact that also, like flow states, like when you're working really hard, you're editing a video or you're writing a paper, it's gone. Who are you at that moment? You don't even know. Yeah. It's just the paper and the writing, and this deep flow state kind of thing. When we're going in surgery, we don't have a sense of self in surgery with amnesia. What's it called? Not amnesia. What's it called?
Anesthetics.
Anesthesia. That's right. So, anyway, what do you think about that? Those kind of evidences.
I mean, to me, after sitting with it, it is more to me. It's just more intuitive that we don't have free will.
Why?
Just based in everything that I kind of described earlier with like the examination. After pondering the question enough, there is just everything depends on what I know and understand.
Yeah, I really love that analogy. I thought that was an excellent analogy.
Thank you.
Because you can only know what you've studied in a sense, but in that analogy, that's perfect because like your experience as a human being, even like the embryos and the situation in the womb, you don't control that, and that all affects who you become later on, and the kind of experiences that you have as a child affects how you interpret certain situations. I love that, but none of that is a choice. None of those experiences, even though we feel like we've made those choices, or we feel like we have some sort of future that we're working towards, we don't know how that came about in the first place. In the same way that, because basically, like you're saying, we only work with what we know. It's kind of like the whole idea is there original thought or not? I love that analogy. Now, we only have 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
And about 18 minutes left. And I was hoping my math is bad. 16 minutes left. I was hoping we can talk about what you brought up earlier, which is the pragmatic point, which is okay, so maybe we can establish that free will doesn't exist. Now, we have to talk about the what people say against that position, which is we didn't even talk about compatibilism. So I kind of go over that really quick. Like there are people, compatibilists basically think that there is a free will, like Daniel Dennett's a famous compatibilist, that there is a free will and everything's determined. Now, of course, philosophically, that's just a non sequitur. That's just a contradiction. It's just a contradiction. So to me, that doesn't make sense. But the way they see it is that free will is kind of like an emergent property of biology, in the same way that stars are an emergent property of the Big Bang. So the emergence of a free will, of an acting agent, something that can make decisions more than like an ant or a bee or a flower, something like that, is an emergent property of nature. Yet it is still determined, but there is a certain freedom of decision making that has emerged from this deterministic universe. Now, of course, it's contradictory. I mean, it's still like, how do you get non-determination from a determinate universe?
Yeah.
I don't know. What have you thought about much of trying to put those two together?
Yeah. No, that's something that I've been looking into. Well, not specifically free will, I suppose. But it's one thing that I've been thinking about since we decided to have this conversation on this topic was, um, what does quantum physics imply for something like this? You know, because from my I'm not a physicist or anything, but it does intrigue me. From my understanding, it begins to break down deterministic thinking.
So that's a really, really interesting subject. Yeah.
And so once you begin to introduce that into other frameworks, that not everything, it's not all cause and effect. It is that is our essentially, like I said, I'm not a physicist, but essentially our observation of it that makes it so. It's not fundamentally, that paper's not fundamentally folded 100 times.
Right.
There's possibility for what I see as sort of this wave collapse, as it's not free will until it's observed as actual free will. Kind of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's interesting thought.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like wave collapses, and it's not a particle until it's actually observed that it's a wave until you observe that it's a particle.
Yeah, right.
The cat's dead and alive until you observe that it is one of the two.
Right. Or the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Like, we don't know where an electron is. That's really good that you brought that up, because that is a big argument that compatibilists use to support their position, is that, in a certain sense, I mean, if you're not a theist too, that's the other thing. You can't, like, if you believe in God, of course, it's like God endowed free will, so you can choose to love him or not. Then that's a different subject. But if you get rid of the religious side, quantum theory and the quantum field, which Lawrence Krauss famously stated in his book A Universe from Nothing, which wasn't really nothing. His nothing is what he calls is really this quantum field where particles pop in and out of existence at random. And that randomness suggests, because what true randomness is a lack of contingency. It's a lack of something occurring because of something else. So a particle popping out of non-existence into existence, whatever that means physically, because I'm no physicist, so I'm probably getting a lot of this wrong. But I've heard this argument where the fact that there is room for randomness, that we don't have a truly deterministic universe, lays a possibility that there is a will that is free from everything else. So, I mean, that the reason I feel that argument fails is because we have to go to the quantum level to find true randomness. And also, even though we go to the quantum level to find true randomness, it's randomness to our perspective now. It could be that the quantum field and particles coming in and out of existence are actually contingent on some other unknown natural thing. We just don't know. But what we call random now could actually be reliant on some deeper, fundamental, natural existence. So I'm not so sure about that argument, because we're not really 100% sure. And I'm not sure what the consensus in physics is about randomness or non-contingency. Yet I think that philosophically it could very well be related to something that exists prior to the quantum field that causes the quantum field to seem as though particles come in and out of existence when really they're being caused by something else. So I don't know. I mean, it's a really difficult subject, but still, I don't think that gets us to free will. I think it's a really, really long stretch to say that, because quantum particles can come in and out of existence, like at the foundation of the universe, they could be even eternal, means therefore we possibly have free will. It doesn't seem to fit the evidence, or logic. So it's but it's an interesting question. I could think about that a lot more. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no. Well, I was just thinking it's to me worth pursuing the thought, this um, paradox of free will, compatibilism. I mean, I don't know, I don't really know the argument there. I was just throwing that in there as how I could see that making some sort of sense.
Well, there's another branch of compatibilism that I actually kind of ascribe to personally, but I don't like to call it compatibilism because it makes me seem like I think free will is a real thing that exists and determinism is a real thing that happens. The way I see, so there's another branch of compatibilism where it's like, yeah, everything's determined, but so what? That doesn't change your experience. Like, just because everything's determined doesn't mean that you should now go feel free to shoot anybody you want, do whatever you want, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And because I think that the fact that we have a social order, like a pragmatic social order, that we should ascribe to, even though there's no free will. The reason I think people object to the lack of free will so quickly is because everything is rested on that idea. Everything is rested on the idea that, like all of our laws are based on the fact that you are a conscious agent that makes decisions. And if you say that there is no free will, then could somebody use that in court? Like, well, I was determined by my upbringing and everything like that. I still think that's wrong. So the compatibilist, that the branch I'm trying to talk about, is like, yeah, there is no determinism, but you should still care about your choices, and you should still think about your life, and you should still try to make good decisions, because even though the feeling of you doing that may be an illusion, that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do that. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to be a good person. And I mean, we really could have done this conversation. We could even go further into morality, because I think like a lack of free will really has larger implications for like morality and like how we jail people and how we talk about criminals, like people who deserve to die, or people who like. So before, I really wanted to talk about one more thing before we left, but looks like we're running out of time. I don't know if you're okay. Okay. Well, real quick, I want to talk about the other perspective. Really, it's Sam Harris's perspective, and it kind of comes down to the experiential side of free will. So like I was saying earlier, we don't know we don't really know where our decisions come from, specifically when we look directly at our experience. So like if one were to ask, what is the best bird? And you have all these birds in your head, and you decide on one in the end. We don't really know from virtue of direct experience. We don't know where that comes from. It just pops in our head. So Sam Harris would say that there isn't even an illusion of free will, because if you pay attention to experience, there is no feeling of a will. There is actually no experience of a free acting agent. And he would go, and I would go as well, as far as saying that there is no separate agent at all. There's no ghost in the machine making decisions. So a lot of this free will stuff comes from the idea of, our religion specifically, but just the feeling that we feel like we are a separate entity in the universe being pushed around by everything else, which can be completely annihilated. Like through the practice of meditation, or you take psychedelic drugs, or you get really good at sports and you have these flow states, like the feeling of a self drops away all the time. In fact, we value when our feeling of a separate self drops away. That's why we drink. That's why we're always trying to get away from this feeling of this edgy I personhood. And so Sam Harris's argument is that there's not even the illusion of a free will. Like that illusion is itself an illusion. There's no actual feeling of a free will when you pay attention to what it's like to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the boat I lie in as well. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I don't think I've thought about it as logically, um, and hashed out all the evidence and done so. I mean, I don't think I generally have to explain further past, like my analogy for it.
Yeah, that's
why I intuitively now feel that I don't have free will. And sure, some of that intuition comes from flow states, meditation, various things where the self falls away. But to explain it to somebody who hasn't had that, or doesn't really isn't caught in flow states very often, or and when they do, it's like very quick and short time span in them. They might not practice a sport or have really any hobby or anything like that, but they need to know, or not that they need to know, but if I'm trying to get my point across, it's usually I explain how I view it, analogize it to the examination, and it's normally kind of where it peters off because they're like,
yeah,
shit, now I gotta think about that for a while. But what I do with it afterwards, like I said, it's like remember your tether, because it's all good and well. It's all good and well to arrive at the idea that we don't have free will, and even better if you arrive to the conclusion that there's no self. There is then, well, how is this useful,
right,
to me?
Right.
And so what I do with it then is, like I said, remember my tether. Because that's just where my mind goes, is like, what can I do with this information? And then it's create a new idea. And as I explained, it's like I just kind of start informing myself with topics that intrigue me and be more open to people's ideas. Like if somebody, approaches me and tells me that the idea that you've accepted for a long time is not actually real, something like free will, and then I try not to have a knee-jerk reaction and say, I can't accept this. And so instead, I entertain the idea, and it's like, okay, well, how can this then be useful? And all of that comes from, I mean, really realizing that, hey, I don't have a free will. So what do I do with that? And that is, like I said, equip myself to answer those, be in that examination, be in that exam, and answer the questions the best I can now. Better informed, expanding the lens, or tightening that conscious net, kind of like what I was talking about earlier with that theory of or the triangulation model consciousness that I didn't really hash out, but yeah, it's we can change our experiences, but you have to accept that you can't. I mean, it's kind of letting go of old narratives of like free will, for example, or I don't know. There's also like what is useful to you, and if it is useful to for you to accept that you have free will, okay, I'm not going to take that away from you. But if you get in a fight over it, that I don't think it's all that useful to you.
Right.
You know, does that make
It
sense?
does. Because that's actually I mean we're just at the hour mark, but that's really
Yeah,
another part of the puzzle I think is really important to go over, which is
yeah,
like you were saying, like what do you do with this knowledge? And I think there's really two ways. If we can just make, maybe we'll go a little bit over, just like 5 or so
yeah.
minutes.
That's great.
Um,
We started a little late with.
yeah, we did a
There's
little
some
bit,
at
yeah.
the beginning we got to cut out.
But it's I think we're at an hour, so, but it's okay. Um, but I think that that's the important piece. Is like, okay, there's no free will, so what? What does that mean? Does that mean I can do anything? Um, and I love how you're framing it. It's like, okay, what are my tethers? What are the things? Yeah, what are my tethers? What do I do about it? And all you can do is learn more. All you can do is like figure out more. But the way I was thinking about this earlier, and I think that there really is two ways of understanding the lack of free will. There's the intellectual and then the experiential. One, of course, is the one we've really been talking about the most, which is the kind of the intellectual side of that there's no free will. You can use empiricism, scientific study. There's no room for free will. You look at logic, reason, philosophy. There's no room for free will. Even a compatibilist is kind of have to push this kind of. They have to push it in a way that's not truly logically coherent. You have to kind of make a little bit of leeway to make that logically coherent. So you can't. I mean, it's just a contradiction to believe both. And experientially, there's no free will. But that's the other side. It's like those who intellectually understand or hear or read a book and say, oh, there's no free will. Okay, so then I think that the attitude of that is different from the experience of no free will, or rather the experience of no subjectivity.
Yeah.
And that's an important distinction because it is a legitimate worry that what Dan Dennett particularly worries about, the worry of telling people they don't have free will. Because there is a difference between intellectually thinking it and really experiencing it from a moment-to-moment basis. So like in this moment, most people who are listening or, like even between us, it feels like we are individual entities doing something. I'm speaking on a podcast. You're listening. The viewers are listening. It feels like we are agents involved in a situation. Now that, and then those agents, like as personal beings, as Nathan and Jonah and Paul and Jenny and whoever it is, they hear there's no free will, and they may even agree, okay, well, there's no logical sense of free will, and then they go, oh, I can do whatever I want. I can see that the gap, that the bridge to saying that there's no free will to doing something stupid, like shooting up somebody, or like, doing like, oh, well, life doesn't matter, and this kind of nihilism, that I can definitely see as a legitimate concern. Dan Dennett specifically makes this claim rather erroneously, in my opinion, because he thinks that because of this, there is no free will. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Because of this, that there actually is a free will, and because it's use, we need to tell people that there is a free will. Now, on the other side, from my perspective, from like especially meditation and spending long hours looking for my I, my sense of individualness, my sense of the seer of sights, the hearer of sounds, and the feeler of feelings, that entity that I think I am, that there is an experience of that completely disappearing, where the feeling of like I'm over here and you're over there is gone. There's no subject and object. The middle ground between experience of I'm the subject to all of the objects can and reliably does disappear. And we can do that. On our own will. Hence the practice of meditation and other things like flow states, getting into even psychedelics. So the point here is that there's two ways of understanding this. You can intellectually understand it, and I think that that is liable to be dangerous. To just merely understand that there is no free will and intellectually make that a conclusion, like a metaphysical conclusion, and then
Yeah.
do dumb things after that, like have no meaning in their life and that kind of thing. And then there's the other side of experiencing the lack of a free will, experiencing the lack of a self, and living from this place. Because when the experience of no self happens, other things also happen. Like if you really see that there is no you, then it's literally impossible to hate anyone else. It's impossible to have grudges and to be thinking that people did that because they're affecting your sense of self. When that's gone, there's no self to be afflicted. Now that goes into meditation and stuff, and I won't go any deeper, but I think that there is a good way of understanding this and a bad way. I think that there is a danger to telling people about the lack of free will, and there's a really important benefit of knowing and experiencing the lack of free will, which is the one I kind of promote, the one that I think is important.
Yeah, and but in my experience, it's usually also that the one that understands it and can intellectualize it is still probably not going to accept it until they experience it. And so what comes is, or to me, the issue that arises is that there is just an understanding, not an embodiment. There's no implementation. They have nothing to relate it to. So, for example, I can, read all day about like what it's like to have sex, but it can make sense. This goes here. Sorry if any kids are listening.
How about eating an orange? Eating an orange.
Eating an orange, sure. It's just like, I don't know, something that some people have never experienced. Some people have not experienced yet, and so you can logically understand it. It can make sense. You can have all these wheels turning and images come to mind, but until something happens to you to put you in that experience, to actually feel it and embody it, and you won't actually understand. You won't actually be able to accept it.
Right.
So I don't see it as really being all that dangerous, aside from the fact that like people actually when they say that it makes sense and I can accept it, it's like they probably don't. Probably just don't.
Yeah.
Because
right.
It takes more than me telling you about it for it to really hit home with you, for it to really be something that you believe.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think that distinction is extremely important. That like when people hear this information, they object immediately to it. Totally fine. Because it is in the end an experience, which I think can lead to another conversation about identity, which I think is on one of our list of things to talk about. So, I think we're in agreement there. There really is a clear difference in just philosophically and intellectually understanding. Like you can empirically science shows there's no way there's a free will. There really isn't. There's no room. Yeah. Great. But that doesn't really change our experience. Our experience is, well, I still feel like I'm making decisions and I know this and I got to do this and I got to go over here, whatever. There is the other level of experiencing the lack of free will, even and that goes back to like the experiment I was trying to have the viewers do is like choose your favorite movie or choose your favorite dessert. Like if you pay attention to that experience, there really is no will person. There is no thing making a decision. There's just these thoughts that pop up in consciousness. So there is a difference. But the only reason I point towards the the only reason I say that I can potentially see a danger with promoting that there's no free will on the intellectual level alone, is that Dan Dennett, again, I keep bringing him up because he's somebody I disagree with, but Dan Dennett brings up a study, and I hate not to quote these studies, but he brings up a study that which has been repeated, where they had a group of college kids, and they gave them a book about free will, and basically this book concludes there's no free will, and so the whole thing is like an argument. Like they read this book and there's no free will, and then they have another group who don't read the book. They read like a mystery story, something like that, and then they both are given a task, like a game to complete, and they're given an objective, some objective, but the experimenter gives away some way how to cheat, but they pretend it's an accident. They're like, oh, well, yeah, you really could just look over here for the answers. And they're like, I shouldn't have said that, right? And what they found when they put these two groups of people together, the ones who read about the lack of free will and the ones who just read a mystery story, the group that read about a lack of free will were way more likely to cheat than the ones who didn't, who read a mystery story. Now, I see so many problems with the conclusion that has. I think that we don't really understand, like we don't know if the people who read this book agreed with it or not. We don't know if the people who, the correlation can be very tricky. I think the variables are too much, but I think it's an interesting perspective because I think these guys, whoever it was that read the free will argument and the lack thereof, thought, well, I can do whatever I want. There's no free will. And so that's the implication of this study. It's one that Dan Dennett likes to use a lot. So I'm just saying that I think that the difference between the experience of a lack of free will is and philosophically understanding the lack of free will, one is very valuable. Like the actual experience of not being a self is wonderful for a lot of people. And a little bit of a disclaimer, it can also be very bad for people. And I've had experiences with that personally and in other situations. So, yeah. Anyway, I think I'm in agreement with your distinction. I think it's important.
Good. Yeah. I think, yeah.
Good. Well, we're at an hour and 12 minutes. Any other questions, thoughts, or comments?
I don't have anything.
Yeah, me neither.
Else.
I think
there was the subject of the triangulation, but that's a whole.
That seemed to me to be in another philosophical kind of. I would love to talk about that, really, because I think that. But it was something that I realized that it would require a lot of thinking to go along with.
Yeah, well, it applies to this because it's. It expands on the idea of, remember your tethers. But it goes a little, like, way more in depth.
We should talk about that then. I think it would be cool to talk about. I think it'd be cool to talk about that, like in a video, like in its own way. You know what I mean?
Well, talk about what specifically.
What's his name? Bowman? David Bowman?
Bohm?
I think it'd be I think it'd be a great subject to bring him up and try to, because I think you and I come from like different places but go to the same thing, and I think it'd be really fun to kind of hash his ideas out, specifically with consciousness and stuff like that. I think that'd be really cool to do. But anyway, okay. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think this is our first one. I hope there'll be many more, and we can actually start a podcast on our own. So, yeah, thank you for having this conversation with me. It was absolutely enjoyable.
Thanks for having a beer with me.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Nobody knows though, right? I know, and I know that it was completely not your decision because you don't make your own decisions to have this conversation with me. So this is a totally determined situation here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I didn't choose this.
Not at all. All right, brother. Well, I'll talk to you later. Yeah, I gotta go do my thing.
Sir.